So with the launch of Season 9, the Pulverize Druid is back to its original self and potentially being the strongest it's ever been. So in this video, I wanted to go over a more starter version of a Pulverize Druid build that you can easily start playing as you get to level 60 and start into the endgame. Now this version of a Pulverize Druid doesn't actually need any uniques to work, but there's a handful we can use early on that are pretty easy to obtain. They're going to massively increase our strength. One of the main things you need for this build is the shockwave aspect, because you can get a majority of the other aspects from dungeons. And this aspect is Pulverize creates a shockwave that travels forward, dealing some amount of its damage to targets in the path. This is required for pretty much every Pulverize build because Pulverize is usually a small circle in front of you. When you add this, it does a massive shockwave in front of you as well that can actually hit everything on the screen. The uniques we're using are Vasili's Prayer. Now this just has really good stats, and I am currently using Earthen Bulwark. And as this is a Grizzly Rage build, so we're going to be in Grizzly Rage a majority of the time, we are also using Earthen Bulwark, so we can use that in Grizzly Rage, which is allowed through Vasili's Prayer. Then we're using Insatiable Fury, which just gives a massive amount of power increases for any bear builds. And then we're also using Tybalt's Will, because we'll be unstoppable at all times, so this is just a big damage increase as well. And then going into our skill tree abilities, we're starting with Maul with upgrade 1, primarily to get lower into the tree, but early on you can run out of spirit, so you'll be able to throw in some Mauls. Later down the road, we'll probably remove this from our bar. 5 points into Pulverize, our main damaging ability. Upgrade 1, you deal increased damage to CC'd and bosses. Then Raging Pulverize, every 10 seconds your next Pulverize overpowers and makes enemies take increased damage. Then we're going into Earthen Bulwark. We're only using this as a barrier, and with our unique helmet, we can use this in Grizzly Rage. Then we have 1 into Bloodhowl and the upgrade. We're pretty much only using this to shapeshift us. Then upgrade 1 reduces the cooldown from killing and hitting bosses. We'll go over why we're actually using this later into the tree. Then Debilitating Roar, just a big damage reduction to enemies around us. Upgrade 1 fortifies us. Upgrade 2, the primary reason we're using this is we deal increased damage while this is active, so a pretty big burst window for 4 seconds. Then we're going all the way down to our ultimate, which is Grizzly Rage. 5 points into this. This is going to be massively buffing our damage reduction, especially as we stay in it longer and longer. 5 points, it gives us 30% increased armor while it's active, so that's also massive. We'll also be able to extend this by overpowering bosses or killing enemies, so we'll be in this pretty much 100% of the time. Upgrade 1, which has been rebuffed to what it was when the game first launched. You are unstoppable while Grizzly Rage is active, so we'll basically be in Grizzly Rage 100% of the time. We'll always be unstoppable. Upgrade 2, we fortify every second we're in Grizzly Rage, which will give us a majority of our fortify as well. And then going into our passives, we have 1 into Heart of the Wild to get 3 into Wild Impulses. Core skills cost more, but deal really big increased damage. 3 into Iron Fur, we gain damage reduction while in Werebear, which will be all of the time. We currently have 3 into Ancestral Fortitude for increased resistances. 1 into Vigilance for DR after using a defensive, which will be up a lot of the time. Then we have Backlash, increased damage after using a defensive, which will be up a good amount of the time as well. Then we're going down to Nature's Reach, increased damage to distant enemies, and double that if they're CC'd, which will be a good amount of the time as well. For Aptitude, you deal increased damage while healthy and more while above a certain movement speed, which will be up 100% of the time because of one of our seasonal powers. Then 3 into Crushing Earth. Earth skills deal increased damage to CC'd enemies. 1 into Safeguard, so crits with Earth skills fortify you. We might not need this, but I just put 1 point into it to make sure we're always fortified. 1 into Stone Guard, while you have fortify over 50% of your base life, you deal increased Earth damage. Then we have 3 points in Amending, primarily for the increased life and to get Provocation. So every 10 seconds have Werebear form. Your next non-defensive skill will overpower and deal increased damage. You can take 2 points out of Mending and put them into something like Stone Guard for more damage, but the increased life increases our overpower anyway and just makes us more tanky. But you can switch those points, it's not going to be the biggest of issues. Then 1 into Neurotoxin to get 3 into Envenom. You deal increased critical strike damage against poison enemies. Then 3 into Toxic Claws. You deal increased poison damage, which is going to be massive. You can also get this while in Werewolf, but there's currently not a really good way to do this when in Grizzly Rage. Then we're going down 3 points into Defiance. Nature skills deal increased damage to elites. 3 into Natural Disaster. Your Earth skills deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. I have 1 point in the Circle of Life just to heal off every Pulverize. You can change this to something else if you really want to. Then 3 points into Quick Shift. Shapeshifting into a new animal form grants increased damage, and this stacks up to 6 times. Now this is the primary reason we're actually using Bloodhowl. So what you do is you Bloodhowl, puts you into a werewolf, use one of your other abilities, it takes you back into Werebear. That's 2 different stacks. So you do that a few times, and when you're killing things, Bloodhound comes up really quickly. So you'll stack that up to 6 times, but Quick Shift does not have a duration if you're not in human form. So if you're in any animal form, this passive just doesn't have a duration. It also includes when in Grizzly Rage. So what you do is you stack up your Quick Shift to 6 times, then you go into Grizzly Rage and you'll just be in werebear form 100% of the time, even if you don't have the unique chest piece. So this will just be extra damage stacked all of the time. Then for our capstone, we're using Urzine's Strength, massively increase max life, massively increase damage, massively increase overpower damage while in werebear and 8 seconds after. So this will just be up 100% of the time. That brings us to our spirit boons. We're using Gift of the Stag, increase max spirit, and you gain 10 spirit per second, which is really strong amount of spirit regen. Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage, and then Iron Feather for increased max life, which will give us more life and more overpower damage. You can also go into Sight Talons for increased critical strike chance, but I think the max life is just generally better. Then Calamity, extend the duration of ultimates by 35% for our Grizzly Rage, so we can stay in it 100% of the time. Then Obsidian Slam, every 6 casted attack cause your next Earth skill to overpower, so just more overpowers with our Pulverize. And that brings us to our seasonal powers. We're going to be using Celestial Surge put on our Pulverize, so this will pull in all enemies and just drop a bunch of stars on them to deal damage. And when fully upgraded and at max rank, these stars will just constantly fall around you, so it's just extra damage, and the pull in together is really nice. For our infusion, we're using Corrosive Infusion, which will do poison damage, which we buff up a lot, and we're primarily doing poison damage. And this just turns the damage of your Celestial Surge into poison damage over 4 seconds. This will also disable vampiric effects from enemies as well, but primarily because we're turning it into poison, because we can just scale that damage a lot more. Then for our arcana, we're using Shifting Powder. Your catalyst increases your movement speed by 70% during its effect and for 5 seconds after. So anytime Celestial Surge procs during the duration where it's dropping all the stars, we have the increased movement speed, then 5 seconds after. So we'll be able to have up this movement speed almost 100% of the time. It's a little off, but this will be a lot of our movement speed. And then we're also using Bloody Charm, where the ocular rune from our Celestial Surge will execute non-boss enemies with 20% or less health. And if it executes, it also reduces your cooldown. So this is just an execute on non-bosses, which is incredibly strong, especially if you're trying to push like high pits and stuff. It's very good. I'm currently using Gleaming Conduit, which increases the size of our catalyst, but whenever I get it, I'm going to want to be using Sapping Crux, which your catalyst applies vulnerable. I think it's up to 8 seconds when max rank, but this will be the main way we apply vulnerable as well. Then for my mercenaries, I'm currently using Subo as my hired mercenary to be with me. This is primarily because we can use Molotov and then Scorched Earth upgrade, which the initial damage from Molotov makes enemies take massively increased damage over time from you, and we have a lot of different ways to deal damage over time, so that will be pretty good for some bursts. Then we're just going into Snipe and Incinerary Bolt, which if he hits a target he originally aims at, a Molotov explodes on them, which again will cause them to take increased damage over time. So this is actually pretty good on bosses because there's only really one enemy there most of the time, so you just be able to deal massively increased damage over time to them. Then for our reinforcement, we're using Variana with her Bloodthirst ability, and the main reason for that is when she uses this, you'll also gain 10% increased attack speed, and just put that on Pulverize as well. And then that brings us to our Paragon boards. Now, like always, this early on, my Paragon boards are kind of messed up. You're just kind of trying to go into whatever is working for you at the time, especially as you're progressing through Torment tiers. But our first board, I'm just using Headhunter, which buffs normal nodes within range, and then the secondary increases our damage to elite. And then our first board is going to be Heightened Malice. When enemies are poisoned near you, you deal increased damage, and this stacks up even more if there are more near you. Then the glyph we're using is Earth and Sky, which is a bonus to magic nodes within range. The secondary makes your nature skills deal increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies, so there's just another big damage increase. The next board we're taking is Ancestral Guidance. After you spend 75 spirit, you deal increased damage. This will be up a majority of the time. One of the big reasons I went to this board next was before I change out some of my gear, I want the spirit on kill, so you can get 1 spirit on kill here, 2 more on here, and then another one here, because early on, if you don't have some additional things to generate spirit, you'll start to run out. So even getting a few spirit on kill is usually enough, especially if you're, say, doing like pits or something. But that finally brings us to our gear, as we went over Vasili's Prayer, Insatiable Fury, and Tibalt's Will. Now the main one you're kind of going to need for this starter version of the build is Vasili's Prayer. That's primarily so you can use Earthen Bulwark while in Grizzly Rage. But outside of that, all 3 of these uniques are primarily just for more stats. They just give you a lot more. They give you a lot more damage, a lot more really good stats. But then for our legendary aspect on our weapon, you want Pulverize to do that big shockwave to do a lot more damage. On your necklace, you want Wild Grizzly Rage Rage is active, your direct damage is converted into poison damage, and you deal massively increased poison damage, and you passively spread rabies, which is another dot, so just more poison damage over time. And rabies is actually really good. Even into like Torment 2, rabies actually still does a lot of damage. Then for our other offensive aspects, we're using you deal increased damage while hitting a poison enemy as a werebear, so just more damage increase. Then we're using the duration of Grizzly Rage is increased by up to 10 seconds. In addition, when you crit while in Grizzly Rage, you increase your critical strike damage for the duration up to 100%, and that's multiplicative, so just massively increase critical strike damage while you're in Grizzly Rage. And then finally, your core skills deal some amount of increased damage up to 75% based on your fortify. We're going to be fortified all the time, so this is another big damage increase. Then on our boots, we have Pulverize is also now an earth skill. After it overpowers, your earth skills cooldowns are reduced by a little bit, and this is primarily so Pulverize is an earth skill that'll just help with some additional scaling stuff, but reducing the cooldown of something like Earthen Bulwark can actually be nice for your defensive. And then that brings us to our runes and our gems. In your armor, you're going to want willpower, and as you get runes you want to use, you'll replace the willpower gems in one of your armor pieces. Then in your weapon, you want runes. I'm currently only using 2 runes. Cast a non-channel core skill, which will give us increased critical strike chance, stacking up to 25%. So this will just give us a lot of crit pretty much all of the time. Then in our jewelry, we're using the new seasonal jewels. The first one I'm using is you gain increased primary core stat, max life, and are unhindered. This will now summon some random enemies that'll hunt you when you're in like boss fights or dungeons. They haven't been strong against me yet, so I don't know if this is actually going to be an issue at some point. Then we're using you deal increased elemental damage, but take 10% more, and we're primarily doing poison damage. So this will just be pretty big damage increase. Then finally, we're using your catalytic skill deals a weapon damage of your infusion's element over 3 seconds, so poison, and a lucky hit dealing damage of your infusion's element, which is pretty much everything we're doing, has up to a 33% chance to trigger its secondary effect. So just a bunch of additional damage proccing, more poison damage, just going to be dealing more damage for us. Now, if you want to follow all the stats, there will be a build planner in the description, but some of the more important ones are on your weapon. You have the tempering roll for chance for Pulverize to hit twice. That's pretty important. Then on your jewelry pieces, you actually want Grizzly Rage cooldown. Now, the main reason for this is because of how Grizzly Rage works right now. We'll be able to stay in Grizzly Rage 100% of the time if we're in combat hitting things. If we're killing things and overpowering bosses a lot, we can stay in Grizzly Rage, but if we stay in Grizzly Rage long enough for the cooldown to come back, but then Grizzly Rage ends, once you get out of Grizzly Rage, it will actually go back on cooldown. So the main thing you're going to want to be doing is just continuing to increase the duration of your Grizzly Rage by killing things or overpowering bosses, and then once the duration gets low, you reactivate Grizzly Rage before you get out of it, because that will allow you to stay in 100% of the time. But if you ever don't, or you're between packs or something and it drops off, you want the cooldown reduction to get back into it more quickly. Getting duration on jewelry pieces doesn't seem super important right now, because if we're actually in combat, we can stay in it. But that's been the entirety of the starter version of the Pulverize Druid build for Season 9. This build is incredibly strong like this, but as we progress more, as we start getting some of the other uniques we need, this build is going to get absolutely ridiculous, and I'll be doing that in future videos. I want to update this build a bunch because this has been one of my favorite builds since the launch of the game. Just Pulverize Werebear Druids are always so fun and satisfying. So I'll definitely be doing a bunch of updates on this build, but that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.